Order all your half-shell favorites for takeout or delivery. Visit www.halfshelloysterhouse.com to browse the familiar menu and place your delivery or takeout order in minutes. Same menu prices, just a $5 flat delivery fee every time at Half Shell Oyster House, located at 115 Laurel Park Cove, Suite 105, Flowood, Mississippi, 39232, or you can give us a call at 769-257-7586. And oh yeah, tell them Sonya sent you.
She say sports. She say sports. She say sports. She say sports.
Hey, y'all, it's your girl Sonya, and welcome back to She Say Sports. Today I have with me Professor of Sports Studies at Texas Southern University and host of Inside the Sports Lab radio show. Please welcome the head lab researcher, Dr. Kenyatta Cavil.
That's
Hey, Doc, how you doing?
I like that. I like that. Thank you. Great introduction.
How you doing today?
I'm doing well. Excited about the early season thus far. A lot of good stuff to discuss. So as you know, we can get on into it. You know, we're well underway into Swac ball. Well, all college football, but especially Swac ball. But before we start talking about that, I just want to know, how did your journey begin in sports? Wow. I don't know quite where to begin. I guess like many people, as a youth, my parents put me in sports probably to keep me busy because I don't think I was that good, even as a youngster, but I did have fun. So I started playing soccer as far as back as I can remember. I basically could put on cleats. I remember one thing as a soccer player when I was playing, I got the honor of making what they call an all-star team. Okay. I got sick, just the flu at the time, parents are protective. And I was sick, so they wouldn't let me go play in this all-star game. And I just could not understand it. I drank the tea and try to act like I was well. They like, boy, you sick.
They're like, boy, you sick.
And that stuck with me because I was just ruined. I don't understand. I think that was the reason I wasn't very good, because mentally I checked out. But I played baseball as well, in the Little League and those kind of things.
So did you have the flu or something? I mean, did you have a cold? What was going on?
Yeah, I think it was the flu. They were worried. I was sick. As a young folks, the other thing was more important than getting well. I'll be okay. But no, I was sick. I needed to get rest. Yeah. And I got over it pretty quick. But that weekend for that tournament and that game, it was gone.
Yeah. Well, thank God for wise parents.
There you go.
You would have fell out there. So we're glad.
Right.
So you, like you said, it just started happening as a child. You played sports and so you felt like you weren't good enough to play, but you enjoyed learning about it. Is that
correct? I knew I wasn't very good in terms of, everybody has these dreams of playing professional sports. For me, it was more baseball. I played soccer, but soccer was an international sport. This was before MLS, so that wasn't realistic. I couldn't hit the curveball, so I knew I wasn't going to make Major League Baseball. So I played in the band as well, so that was part of the thing. I went to school at Prairie View A&M University. Coming out of high school, decided I was going to major in engineering. Looked at architecture engineering. Prairie View didn't have architecture engineering. They had architecture and mechanical engineering. Found a good friend of mine, Alan Williams, still best friend, was in my wedding and everything. He did mechanical engineering. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna do mechanical engineering as well. Luckily, it worked out for me. Looked at the band and then realized that they played the band just as serious as you practice the sports, whether it's baseball or curveball or football during that part of the season. And that didn't work too well for me studying engineering. So I found out real quick that if I was going to make it, it was just going to be about trying to make some grades that allowed me to do well as engineering, and it worked out. Stayed a year. Prairie View was so nice. I said I went there twice. So I stayed a year for graduate studies and did applied mathematics degree in scientific computation, I should say. And a lot of ways the rest is history. Went and worked in the field in project plant management using the engineering degree. And the reason I kind of put that in there as I was doing this, you may have recalled TSPN with Ken Rashad, the Swac Page Network. I was a buzzer bee and got into that and just loved the competition and the camaraderie with everybody on there representing their schools and learning so much more history about the Swac than I ever thought. And literally just one day fell in love with HBCU sports specifically, more than I knew. That includes when I was in high school, taking a trip up to the State Fair Classic with Prairie View and Grambling. Didn't quite know that I loved it then, but I loved everything about it. And I take you back to 2002. I had a poll ranking where I started doing HBCU poll rankings. And this is kind of where the history started, oddly enough. You know, you had the Sheridan Heritage poll out there, which at the time was one of the polls that listed certainly the football poll rankings. And if you recall in that poll ranking that goes back to 1920 with the Pittsburgh Courier, they would put all HBCUs in the poll, Division II, NIA, including 1AA at the time, FCS now, Division I programs. And a lot of the fans on the page had major concerns. They played different schedules. It was different like that. So I kind of listened to it, and later I would go do my MBA, but I guess I was using some of that marketing business intuition and said, we should have a poll that separates those two. There's distinct between the 63 scholarships you could use at the FCS level, and obviously 32 scholarships at the Division II level and 24 at the NIA level. And I thought 24 and 32 were relatively close enough. So I called that mid-major and created one poll that would rank top 10 football teams, later men's and women's basketball, and even baseball. I've stuck with the football poll ranking because I partner with some groups to do baseball. I do the basketball rankings, but I've shortened that to just the top 5 programs.
Right, because that's a lot of teams.
It's a lot of teams in that, but a lot of ways the football poll ranking had become pretty intriguing with the FCS being the major division. And the time that I knew that I was onto something, I got busy doing my traditional work in the lab, as you might say it, as an engineer. And I got an email that talked about the fact that, hey, where's the poll ranking? People are asking about your poll ranking.
Wow.
And I just forgot about it. It got busy and didn't realize it was that important. I guess I thought I would just get to it at some point. And that's when I knew that, hey, if I'm gonna do this, I need to be dedicated to it. I need to do it regularly and consistent. And ever since then, you've been getting the weekly Dr. Cavil's Inside the HBCU football poll rankings and covering.
You've been doing that for 20 years.
20 years.
Wow.
Years. This year makes 20 years. Yeah, anniversary.
That's congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Wow. So coach, I'm gonna call you coach. Doc.
That's good. I'll take it.
Okay.
Now, the good thing about me, I can't get fired. So I'm all right with that.
That's true. So Doc, I'm gonna.
No, I need to be careful with that. I guess the wife, she may sometimes she probably hey, so maybe not.
Exactly. So Doc, we're gonna take it down. We're gonna move on a little bit. A few months ago, you actually had the opportunity to go to Swac and MEAC Media Days, and for both conferences. And tell me this: are there any? I've always wondered, because I was like, that was so cool that you got to go to both of them. I've actually been to the Swac Media Day, and it's amazing. I love it. Couldn't make it this year. Had some things going on. I was moving, so I couldn't come this year. But what are some differences of the Media Day, if there are any? And if so, what are they?
Between the MEAC and the Swac?
Yeah, Media Days. They're Media Days. Oh,
yes, there's certainly a difference between the two. And we missed you not being able to get there, but certainly understand. Yeah, we certainly understand that you got to take care business in terms of what that life's like. But we need your voice around. Let me say that first.
Thank you.
And you do such a wonderful job. So we do miss having you around in terms of being able to provide a different perspective that we need to make sure is in the HBCU space. But get back to your point is, like you said, for 20 years, I've been doing this essentially for 20 years. For the most part, hadn't missed a media day. So I remember various media sources out there. Started with the Swac, and then I grew in a little bit with the SIC, doing the CIAA, and even the MEAC a couple of times. But so I'll take it back just a slight bit of history. I remember when they used to have the luncheon for the Swac, and you would come in and coaches would talk. It was very festive at that point. A lot of jaw jacking with the coaches in regards to being able to kind of rib each other. Right. That's not the case for the Swac or MEAC. They're many of them are good friends, but I don't know if it's because of just how much pressure it is on now to win and what schools are paying coaches. They're a lot more serious than they were then. Now, if you catch them on your own volition or develop some real relationships, authentic relationships with you, you'll get to see that side. So I want to make sure it's clear that these are folks that do have traditional nature, fun, and do know how to have it, but they don't necessarily show it with the media. And I think a little bit with the media explosion has changed that. Not necessarily good or bad, it's just changed. But more specifically, as you talk about from the Swac to the MEAC, modern time, the Swac has exploded in terms of the number of folks that were at the media platform and what you see involved. I remember when we used to just have the pen and paper, a recorder. Now you have at the Swac and to some degrees of MEAC, much less individuals there, but you have people that do full-fledged productions, that you see little media productions, as you noticed from last year, right? And there were even more this year in regards to having the open room, which we're kind of used to, where you have folks walking around with the little mic and whatever, coaches sitting at the table, half on one side and half on the other side. 2 years ago, that was 5 and 5. Now it's 6 and 6, representing division with the expansion of the conference with Famu and Bethune Cookman, as you know. And then on the back room, they have a radio row. I remember 5 years ago when there were like 2 people on radio row. And now you had 15 some people in radio row. Wow. Again, I remember when there was no production, no television. If you got television, it was local news. You still have the local news. That is probably doubled in size from each of the city with more news people coming involved. But you also have independent HBCU or Black media, if you would, that are in the space, that are creating that narrative, that are coming in with their own production. So that was big when you see that. But yeah, I remember going from BET being involved to MBC, if you remember that, when we had the short stint with NBC, right? Obviously with ESPN. And so they do a big platform with ESPN, Jay Walker, Tiffany Green are involved, bringing the players up. Nice stage production. Now, less people at the MEAC in terms of media sources. Obviously, not as many teams, so that could be one part of it. But just in general, not as many media folks covering them in that space. And this was even before the teams left. And they stayed with the luncheon until COVID. They took away the luncheon. They haven't brought it back. But they had a luncheon, which was fascinating because it was kind of the old, but with the even more spin on it. And you would have Jay Walker involved, bringing him up to the stage as the moderator, talking with the coaches and involving. And it was in Norfolk. So Norfolk would have a large crowd there. Hampton would have pretty good. You would have a contingency of folks coming in from North Carolina Central, riding the bus. A&T would have a good group. Obviously, with A&T, Hampton, FAMU, Bethune Cookman moving the conference and going to different conferences, you had last folks in there. But over the last couple of years, they do a full-fledged production. So they have the cameras, the new lighting in the background with the digital platform screens. Looks really nice in terms of full-fledged production, which is probably the difference that you see. Just a lot more people involved with the Swac, but you see a much heavier production side in the MEAC. And you see that with the SIC. They do the media day at the College Football Hall of Fame. So that's really unique and nice because you have all that scenery in there, and it's a pretty good production. A lot of people there covering it because you have so many teams in the SIC, but not as much as the Swac, and similar to the CIAA. They do it as well, and they have a medium amount of coverage. And so all of them are unique with their own culture, which is also fascinating.
That's what fascinated me. I was like, that's so cool. So cool.
Yeah, no doubt that they all have their uniqueness, and it's intriguing to kind of explain it. You're very familiar with the Swac culture, where you have this rabid fan base, I would like to describe it, right? That are all into what is their institution and other institutions. The rivals that exist, which are amongst all of them, but such a rabid fan base that wants to get this information. And the other ones have solid fan bases, and they want the information, but to me, it's not quite as rabid. When you go to SIC, you have more private schools involved with CIAA, SIC, and at one time, obviously, MEAC. So I wonder, does that create a different uniqueness in terms of the private school nature of it? And also, obviously, the size of the institutions are different when you start moving into the SIC, CIAA, and even to some degree with the MEAC and SWAC.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like you say, they're all the same, but they have their own little culture that goes with it. That's what I was wondering. I was like, I can't wait to ask you that because Sonja Steele, the commissioner of MEAC, she was on the show, and I'm so excited. I'm ready to see her do some amazing things. First female commissioner for the MEAC, so I'm rooting for her. Not when they play us though, but I'm not any sweat, but I'm rooting for her. Because I want to see her.
See, that's what I told you about that unique passion of the SWAC. No, I'm rooting for you. I'll get it, but not until you play the SWAC.
Not when y'all play us though. No, and that's any SWAC team. I'm like, So I wish her well. I really, really do. But thank you so much for giving us that information because it's, you would think it would be the same, but it is, but not. So because of the different cultures. Right. So Doc, a lot has happened, as you know, in the last 2 years when it comes to HBCU football, and HBCU alums and supporters are repping their schools like never before. HBCUs are being more recognized across the nation. How has television changed the scope of being a fan of HBCU athletics?
Oh, really important question when you take into context. And I'm gonna move it just from television to multimedia.
Okay.
In terms of the social media platform, because I think that's really what has breaking, Pandora's box, if you would, and really open the lens and allow folks. So as you know, coming into this one, we started covering this in a lot of ways. You had more of either pure regional media spaces that were covering their particular conference, and they might dip their toe in terms of the greater HBCU landscape, but it was more regional in nature. Now it's global, right? National, but at the same time, it's also moving into individual spaces. So you have individual programs that are covering, the pregame show, obviously what you're doing here in a lot of ways. Carlos Brown, he's been in it a while, but still specifically covering the institution. You got 1876 sports and culture in terms of Prairie View. You have FAMU doing the O&Z strike zone, right? You got the G with the partnership with Southern and Alcorn State. So you have a lot more individual programs. You even have one out there for A&T in terms of the Blue Death Valley in terms of what they do. There's a Hampton one out there. There's a Tennessee State podcast out there that I'm aware of. And that's just the ones that kind of come to my mind. You have a lot more in the East Coast that are starting to get into this, that Southern East Coast, Atlanta region, where they're covering a lot more HBCUs. So you have this explosion of folks. And then you have obviously Facebook, YouTube, which allows folks, Zoom, which allows us now to do this visual partnership where you just don't have the voice also. Now you get the voice and the visuals. And I think so many more people are tactile and visual, not just auditory in terms of how they receive information. So I think with that exploding in space, in fact, that we had COVID, which obviously has brought a lot of devastation and negativity. But if there's anything that has come out of this, it gave us a chance to kind of sit down and take in a space and become more reflective of being able to have our own voice out there in a different way. So I think what you're bringing to the table is an example of that, how you want to make sure that your voice and love for the Swac, Jackson State, Mississippi, you know, all these parts that you bring to the table of who and what you love in regards to that, and seeing the need and the beauty of being able to get that information out there. There's a lot more people doing that, and it's changed the space. You know, there's some negativity that comes with that, but it's been more positive in terms of the reinforcement of what I see as a cultural empowerment of what we see of having the voice for HBCUs out there. I will say this, though, it's important to understand once you recognize that it's out there, that there's a legacy, a rich legacy. And so there's the importance of when you have this opportunity that you have to really understand the magnitude of what you can do of putting it out there. And that can be detrimental or it can be influential in terms of moving things positive. So I hope just a little bit more people consider that in terms of what their space does, of understanding how you create more cultural empowerment impact on HBCUs, as I like to call it, the sporting HBCU diaspora.
I love that. I love it. I mean, just because you're right, just thinking about how with everything with COVID and how it brought, you know, people just started wanting to talk and wanting to, it's been amazing. Zoom is amazing. You know, all of these different platforms to be able to get a chance to say and have a voice. So you're right. That's true.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
So if television dollars is at the FBS level, is the Swac on the cusp of realistically moving up from the FCS to the FBS?
I think it's going to be all dependent on the media rights deal. And if HBCU Go is any indicator of where we're going in terms of what we're hearing the numbers are out there, and I have some pretty good sources that suggest that those are pretty much spot on, that there is a realistic chance, especially with ESPN coming up to where you get a chance to renegotiate that deal or seek another platform of that magnitude.
Yeah.
And if you're able to get the same type of dollars or more dollars of what you're getting for HBCU Go, even with HBCU Go, is my understanding when you start looking at that dollar amount, it's bigger or equal to the bottom 3-4 components of the G5. So take out the Power Fives for a moment, because that's just a different level. But if you having that money, what people may not realize is the broadcast television media deals that allow these institutions to make the move from FCS or maintain the move at FBS, is what we talk about it in terms of previous what was 1A. So with those significant dollars there, I believe that if everybody stays on the same page and continues to develop their program with these new dollars in terms of upgrading various components of their athletic department, is no second thought for me that FBS can be realistic. Now, Power Five, which we see is a different level of money, and they've been involved with it so long, it's going to be difficult to crack that nut. You know, I teach marketing in terms of sports studies. And one of the things that are beneficial in marketing is to understand the connection of people. But when we talk about business, first to the market is important. It's a terminology we use out there. And what it does, it tends to allow you to have market share. So if you stay in front of the curve with the market share, it's hard for folks to come entry into the market and capture you at the largest part of the market share. So quickly, let's think about McDonald's. You know, McDonald's has like 70% of the market share. Coca-Cola has a large percentage, you know, of the market share. Nike has a large percentage of the market share. Now, that doesn't mean that, you know, a Jack in the Box, right? Burger King can't capture a significant market, or some of these novelties that can get 1 or 2%, because people fail to realize each of those markets are billion-dollar markets, right? So you don't need but 5% of the market to have $1 million business and be able to do really well. So sometimes, while our desire is to look at the Power Fives, which certainly when you're seeking, you know, to increase your viability, I would never say that you shouldn't have that as a goal, but understanding the realistic steps of getting there is important in terms of just natural business frameworks. And part of that is the step up, where you want to increase the share of your market as you grow. The quickest one I can talk about is Nike and Under Armour, because I share this with my students. And I had a great friend, Michael Washington, who talked about Under Armour and how he saw it coming in the market. He really was fascinated and loved what they did. And a lot of that was coming out of the military and getting that great contract with the shirts that they were wearing that created a different feel in terms of the nylon of sweat and reducing sweat to your body. So it gave them an entry market. And so they actually increased the market space in itself. But I told them it'll be a challenge to catch Nike because Nike had all his space. And he talked about Adidas and Converse and how they lost the share of the market. I said, that's a great point and a great example. But I said, they were not able to grow. And you see that differently with Nike, that continues to change itself in regards to the market space to make sure it maintains and keeps that space. Now, Under Armour came in and got a large percent of the market, but I was like, and after 15 years or so, as he looked back, he admitted and said, you're right, it's going to be a challenge for them to catch now that I understand the marketplace a lot better. So that's the example when you're talking about the Power Five. We even see a separation from the Power Five with these last two deals in terms of SEC and the Big Ten about these billion-dollar businesses where they're going to be given essentially each of the institutions, you know, $75, $85 million with an increasing, leaving the other three behind. And that's even better than what you see from the Jig Five. So even in that marketplace, we need to understand the separation from those departments. So one of the things we talk about in our classes is to understand the sporting marketplace and to create differentials so you can really talk about what these things look like. So when you're making moves, that you can categorize them in such a way that you can really be up on what your challenges are when you look at your framework of moving forward in so many different ways.
That's good stuff, Doc. Great analogy too. I mean, because that kind of breaks it down and let people understand exactly when you bring in Nike, McDonald's, you know, that was really good. Thank you.
Always appreciate it.
Good. So
I try to be the subject matter expert as I'm teaching these classes, and I know when you talk to students, as you are discussing here, it's really important that you give them things that they can really see and imagine and touch, not just what's in a book. So over the years, I've learned how to do that. And so that's kind of where that's coming from.
That really helps. You are a true wealth of knowledge. So Doc, this past, a couple of days ago on Swac Media Day on Monday, you asked Coach Sims from BCU what he thought of the transfer portal and NIL deals regarding his team. What are your thoughts on transfer portals and NIL deals? Do you think they're a blessing or a curse to college football?
Let me first just talk about it from, you said, college football. I've been an advocate for what I call college athletes. I don't even use the term that the NCAA used. Once you learn the historical nature of why they use that term, it was to help them in litigation to make sure that they could stay in amateur status. And when these college athletes would get hurt, that they wouldn't have to pay them out, which stuck with me wrong. You know, I'm an advocate for college athletes. And I believe that if we're going to live in a capitalistic society, even though there's some questionable things that I have about that framework, although now you have this political landscape where you can't even talk about capitalism and socialism without folks trying to tar and feather you. But in a more framework that I think is important to understand is like when you talk about college athletes and the revenue that they are producing for these revenue-driven sports, especially as television that we just talked about has steadily increased, it becomes more challenging to talk about this amateurism, where you have everything else in this business model, but then you want to talk about the college athletes in this amateur model and say that they shouldn't get sports. Right. And then we live in a society that looks at things from an ethnic breakdown, which a lot of people call in terms of race, which I don't even like to use the terminology because there's history conducted to that. But let's be real about it. You have African-American male playing particular sports of football and basketball, right? Generating this revenue where they are subsidizing these Olympic sports, which happen to be played by a lot of European American or white women. And so in another framework, you would call this welfare. I even wrote this in books where you talk about athletic welfare, but it's been always disingenuous with me. In one place, in terms of general society, people look down on the concept of welfare. Not that I do, but they look at it. But then in athletics, they say it's fine to have this socialism welfare practice. So I'm the type of person that likes some consistency. I don't care what the rules of the game engagement are. Tell me what they are, and I'll try to move as best I can. But I want consistency. Don't change the game in one model than somewhere else. So that's always frustrating me. But get to your real question in regards to the transfer portal. I have no problem with it. I think students should have the right coaches that are making $1 million deals. A dean like myself that's sitting in as the interim associate dean of academic affairs. If I have another opportunity in another HBCU, or any college for that matter, as I refer to them as historically white colleges, comes and says, hey, we've seen what you've done, your research and your practices. We'd like to make you an offer. We think you can do something here. I can leave. You know, I talk to my family and we'd say, hey, this is a great opportunity. We're gone, you know, respectfully 2 weeks notice or whatever you want to do. You're gone. Coaches get up and leave. Commissioners get up and leave. Athletic directors get up and leave, and they leave for better opportunity. But you're going to tell me that this college athlete shouldn't have the opportunity to leave when any student is leaving to go from one institution to another institution. And that's just the nature and natural component of it. And then you're going to say college athletes that are not getting paid have to honor their request. That's just what it's about. It just doesn't make sense to me. Now, the last part of this name, image, and likeness. I thought they should always have that. I've actually did the research with a lot of professors that people don't realize that this is more than a 20-year argument where you've had researchers on this side, academic researchers partnering with lawyers that have been fighting and researching litigation, going back to the most noticeable one. They did it before that with O'Bannon when he played at UCLA after that, talking about that this wasn't right. And so you would have legislation and court battles after court battles, winning some, losing some, where you really seen the dam break, if you would, essentially last year with the NIL legislation that started in a lot of ways from California, and even a part of it went to the Supreme Court, and they talked about that a lot of the things that they felt that they saw the NCAA doing was not legally justified in this country, where we have open capitalism, and they don't have a collective bargaining agreement like you see with the NFL, Major League Baseball, NBA, just to name a few. So I think it is well past time that the transfer portal is open and name, image, and likeness. Unfortunately, I even see the fact that they're going to close that down a little bit with new legislation out there that's basically going to say that you can only transfer with 2 periods of time versus open. And a lot of people talk about the fact, well, people were transferring and so many people were in the portal. I'm like, so what? That's life. People make decisions to have to live with it. It's not like y'all really trying to protect these college athletes. If you would pay them their value and their worth And then maybe they wouldn't transfer in the first place because they would have some resources to understand that it is more about their education and learning about making sure they could save and invest their money post-graduation.
And I totally agree with you. Now, I'm on the fence a little bit. I don't mind the players getting money because a lot of them, they need it. They need to be able to take care of themselves. A lot of them, come from underprivileged families. So I get it. However, I've always felt like, because I want them to have a leg up after they graduate. So I've always felt like, give them a stipend once a month. Just a little money, and then the rest of it, I know, this is just my thought, and put it like in a, what do you call it?
Escrow type account.
Escrow type of thing.
Where if you gain interest and they can get it after.
Right.
I wouldn't have a problem with that.
Yeah, they got a leg up, because everybody is not going into the NBA or the NFL. And at least you have some money, right, to start your life, and you can't touch that. It could be $400,000. You never know. I'm just saying, but that's how I would like for them to have it. I wouldn't like for them to just have all this money, because I don't know. It's just, I feel like their drive is different. College football and basketball has always been like, these kids are hungry. It's different. They don't have the same drive that they do in the NBA as they did in college. And I think sometimes the money will probably change that. And that, I don't want that to change. That's my only thing. So.
I think that's a fair assessment. And in a lot of ways, it's probably true. My only thing is like, everybody has their choice.
Yeah,
and so I just don't think it's our choice to be parental in nature,
right,
particularly when it's Black bodies. And there's just something that is dangerous in our society when there seems to be a need to babysit, coddle, watch, direct Black bodies, especially Black male bodies. And so for me, when I see the alternative in regards to baseball, where they can leave after the first year, if you would, in terms of going to the pro, as long as they didn't go to a JUCO. If they go to JUCO, obviously they got to stay the 2 years in terms of before they can leave. But you have the ability to turn pro from gymnastics, right? And so you have tennis, you can turn pro at a very young age. And obviously there have been some concerns that have happened to that, but that hasn't changed the fact that they've tried to address it and legislate it. Right. And so those are the things that really concern me, is that, again, if it's equal and equitable across the board, whatever the rules are, I'm fine with it. But when I see the challenge of how it affects one group of people,
right,
particular agenda, especially when this is a group of individuals that have been socially displaced and depressed in terms of so many years, I just can't sit back and then try to find a way to justify. I have to speak on it. I wouldn't be true to myself. So I'm open to any different type of change that pushes it forward. But for me, it's capitalism. Just open up the door. Let's do like we do in everything else. If it's capitalism, have a free market system, or sit down and do a CBA with these individuals and collective bargaining what takes place from one side or the other. Then if you cap like that, at least the groups had a right to collectively bargain. And so those are the challenges I have, is like, don't tell me that this is the greatest country in the world in terms of capitalism, because you're talking about an open market system, but then find some small component of this society where we say, well, it's not going to work right here, particularly when I say that disproportionately displaces and functions African-American Black bodies, which obviously deals with community and the family, because now you're depriving the community of developing revenue and riches for that community. So this is not something that is about one individual. Again, I talk about it in terms of cultural empowerment, how it affects a community in terms of some of these great historic African-American Black communities and how they have been dysfunctional a lot of ways. We see it right there in Jackson. Jackson is not just having a water problem because they don't have leaders that can't think and do things. We know that there's been financial issues about not having the resources. We see it in questions about legality in terms of a governor of the state that is now having issues in terms of how they circumvented the system with Brett Favre in terms of a quarterback funneling money essentially to help build not just a institution in terms of a lab, but in terms of a volleyball. You can't even get a stadium for Jackson State. You can't even get, right, a basketball. But you want me to say, no, there's a problem with athletes getting it? We got to look at the bigger picture in terms of how these small decisions function societies and institutions, communities. And that's why you have HBCUs that have not yet gotten the appropriate legislative appropriation from the state for hundreds of years. And you're gonna act like that doesn't affect these institutions because they didn't get the funds? And then every time when something happens, you wanna push back and act like they don't know what they're doing? Anybody that takes some time and does some history and open his eyes, they can start to see that this is not by accident. And so I speak on it from that perspective because I don't just look at the individual case. I like to look at it in terms of a micro lens, in terms of what's taken away, from a social, societal position up and down in each category, if you would.
Right. Well, you've opened my eyes, and I understand it better from that point of view. However, that mommy thing, even though I'm not a mother, I'm very maternal. So I just want them to do well. I want them to do well.
But that's different from you, because in a lot of ways, you've been in that way, and you're talking about still from a community perspective.
Exactly.
So you're going to do it with the true value of a mothering framework, right?
Right.
And really their best interest. But I'm saying those folks that are running this, if you would, in terms of doing this for years, one, they're not women.
That's
African American or European American, black or white.
That's true.
They tend to be white males. And you can't tell me white males, no matter how good we try to be in our parental fatherly sense, we're not doing no mothering.
That's true.
That's not just the nature, and not saying that we should be doing it, but that's the way that I say that we have to take ourselves out of it and look at who is actually operating this system and who is it benefiting and why is it benefiting them, and is that right?
Right. That's good. That's good. So Doc, speaking of BCU, what are your thoughts? Before I say what are your thoughts, as we know, they joined the Swac officially last year in 2021. That seems so long ago, but it was last year, July 2021.
Exactly.
It seems so because of COVID. I think it's just throwing everything off. But
right. No,
what are your thoughts? I know. What are your thoughts of BCU, Bethune Cookman University and FAMU joining in the Swac, and how do you grade them? How do you think they're doing?
Well, that's a great question when you talk about the grade. And as a professor, boy, I grade hard. So take that for what it is in terms of my students would tell you that, because I tell them when they come in, play with me if you want to. I put that F squared in your life. And if you get an F squared,
oh no.
Trust me, you're gonna be in trouble. So they learn real quick. But I think it was for the SWAC, I think it was a marvelous partnership. I'll go back to a business perspective. When you talk about the merger of these brands, right? You got a SWAC, which is a significant brand in the landscape. When you talk about the history, the longevity for one part of it,
right,
is significant. And you talk about the who's who that have come out of these institutions, not just athletically, but academically in different fields across the board, creates a significant brand. And I tell my students all the time to understand that you have a brand. And so you need to recognize what that means when you look at the brand. But then you talk about some of the institutions where you talk about Prairie View, the founding institution, Texas Southern University, but even more so Southern, Jackson State, and Grambling, some iconic brands of institutions. Solid institutions in terms of Alabama A&M, the brand of what they developed out of the SIC when they came in early with Pine Bluff, as they came back in to Alabama State when they came back in 1982. But you talk about partnering some of these 3 or 4 largest brands in the SWAC, and the SWAC itself, with FAMU, one of the most significant brands out there in the marketplace. You add that together and you create this union, right? And so when you look at this in terms of a business, it's almost like an acquisition. So your business is doing well, right? And you have the brand and you create either an acquisition or a merger, maybe even a better framework that you look at, right? A merger of the Swac brand underneath Jackson Southern with this significant brand of FAMU. You're talking about exploding, and you see some of the things that are taking place now because of the uniqueness of this merger, if you would, in terms of the brand. You talk about Bethune-Cookman, obviously, they've had some trouble with what they've done in the business model. But if you look at the time that they were coming in, they probably were one of the best overall athletic programs that existed out there in terms of winning across the board, being competitive in football, being champion when they left the MEAC in terms of the women's side, being in the top half in terms of men's and basketball. What they did bringing in baseball, many people have missed of what FAMU and Bethune-Cookman brought to the table in terms of baseball, what Bethune-Cookman did in softball. So you talk about across the board what they did in multi-level sports. When you look at it like that, not necessarily having the same brand, iconic status of FAMU, I think it was a super opportunity for the SWAC in terms of looking at how it could increase the brand value when you put these brand associations together of the SWAC. And I think you saw that with the last note in terms of increased television exposure, what that looks like, right? The new HBCU Gold TV deal in terms of Byron Allen's company, in terms of what he brought to the table. And then obviously when you start doing that brand recognition in a lot of ways with Jackson State University and Coach Prime, it really starts to supernova, if you would, the expectation and the framework of what you see in the iconic brand of the SWAC and those institutions associated with it.
That's awesome. So what are their grades?
The grades I would give FAMU, as I said, I grade hard in terms of where they were, and I measured in terms of overall sport. Obviously had a great football season, made the basketball tournament, volleyball, they played in the championship game. But in terms of where they stood in all sports, and remember, they don't play women's women's soccer. They don't have women's golf in terms of FAMU. Similarly, as you look at Bethune-Cookman, I give a grade of B, if you would, to FAMU.
Oh, for FAMU.
Yeah. No, for FAMU, I give them B minus, and I would give Bethune-Cookman a C or C plus.
Okay. I think that's fair. That's fair. So, speaking of Prime, Coach Prime, Doc, as one of the leading practitioners of HBCU athletics and research, how exciting is the Prime effect?
Oh, it's significant. I just did a research presentation as a guest lecturer at the University of Texas last week. And so it forced me to look a little more deeper at the numbers. I intuitively saw some of this and thought this would be the case. Charles Bishop, partner of mine, as you know, that does there you go, inside the HBCU Sports Lab. We've had these discussions all the time, and obviously he was quietly telling me off the record that this may be real. And I said, actually, Robinson has no choice but to make this. I said, I know he has to check all of the boxes and he has to go through his homework. But I was like, this is a unicorn in terms of Coach Prime. I say, people forget, because we just don't study that type of history. There was at one time when Coach Prime, Deion Sanders, as he was named at time, Prime Time, was selling more shoes at Nike than Jordan. Michael Jordan. Right?
Wow.
And so they were on the same level. Obviously, he changed companies and things didn't work out with Nike, which was part of the reason why you got some of that change is he didn't think he was getting the same treatment as Michael Jordan was getting, as he was driving the sales over there. And then obviously Michael Jordan's sales have went out of the roof since then. So that's a whole different discussion. But I'm just saying historically, if people look at it in terms of hype, in terms of what Deion came to the table, and he was able to sustain that, much like Jordan, in a different way. He was able to sustain his popularity, his iconic status, not just because of the Hall of Fame or two sports, whatever, but being on NFL Network and staying in front of people in terms of being able to be somebody that people still recognize, and then being involved still with youth sports in a lot of ways. I think that was important from that. So when you start talking about his brand, it starts to make sense when you start to understand what it has done to the broadcast networks, the number of games they want to have on, and what he does when they are on television. It is on record that those numbers are high in terms of the largest attendance for Jackson State in terms of the measure of the Celebration Bowl when they came there. Some of the highest numbers in terms of viewerships from that, both in terms of social media platforms and from Celebration Bowl. I had a chance to break down the 219 attendance for Jackson State versus what happened last year in 2021. You know, that's has the COVID in between, but there was a significant 30% jump, if you would, in terms of the overall attendance. His attendance outnumbers several of the FBS, even some P5 programs in terms of Jackson State. Now, there's history associated with that because Jackson State always did well in attendance. And so I don't want to put that out there because people will say that. No, I'm saying in partnership with a great institution, as I told you earlier about the brand of Jackson State and such a loyal fan base that goes back to a unique history in a state that desegregated a lot later than even the southern states around them. And that's part of it too. So that fan base was able to stay connected. When I say fan base, particularly African-American Black folks in the community, Jackson, and throughout the state of Mississippi, even the ones that have traveled outside the state and or abroad, are connected with the uniqueness of Jackson State and the Swac. They have been steadfast in that. And so even during the down years, you see a connection, which is real. And it had the uniqueness that it stayed on top for much of the 80s and 90s, while other teams that had significant histories of Prairie View 50s, 60s, you know, right? Grambling was pretty steady with that, but FAMU, as they were iconic through the 50s, and Tennessee State, other fans in some ways in terms of the ability to navigate the space of winning championships kind of fell off in terms of Prairie View and Tennessee State over that period of time. When you start getting into the late 90s, you know, they've won a couple of conference championships with Tennessee State, one with Prairie View. But in terms of specific football, when you start measuring it and understand that they always had great fan bases, but it's like supersized it now. That interest with streaming platforms and all that out there, you see more folks covering Jackson State than you have before. Obviously, some of that is with the platforms that are out there, but all those numbers show you the prime effect, as I have called it, in terms of what he has done with Jackson State, in a lot of ways, the SWAC. And it was this perfect storm. And usually that's when history is made. It's not just one thing. I do want to make sure that it's clear that he may be the catalyst, if you would, in terms of prime effect. But you get a new commissioner in Dr. Charles McCullum with the SWAC. You get the expansion of the SWAC. You get the COVID stopping of the world. You get what I call another pandemic, the racist pandemic, and what we saw with George Floyd, rest in peace, in terms of how that galvanized literally the world, and how corporations had to change the way that they saw how they were doing business with Black people and Black institutions. Now we can argue, are they still doing enough? That's a different question, but I'm saying you put that on the table and understand that it did create a changing and galvanizing effect. So I don't believe that we've actually hit the tipping point.
I don't think
there are things that keep adding on to this that keep rising the supernova. So he may have been that final jumping off point, but all these things, when you look at the history and the culture, to now have come together to what you're seeing is what I'm calling the prime effect, and how it is legitimate framework, and to borrow a research kind of framing of it, it's similar to what you saw with the Doug Flutie effect, or what many people call the Flutie effect.
Oh yeah. That's good. Well, that I'm gonna leave that alone. I'm gonna move on because I got a few more questions. And I'm gonna ask you this. I kind of don't want to ask it, but I need to ask it because you are definitely drenched in Swac culture, HBCU culture. On last Saturday, before we stomped Grambling, the first half was a little sketchy rather, and it's been reported, Coach said a little something, Coach Prime said something to the team and was like, you're playing on a HBCU level. And should the fans have been in an uproar for the last couple of days on like Swac Central, the different little pages on Facebook. But do you think HBCU fans, and as well, especially Swac fans, do you think they should be offended with what he said?
I can't tell anybody how to feel.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't try to argue that their right to be offended is something that I shouldn't say is not a right disposition. I think
I didn't see it as a slight myself. I understand.
I'll get to that bigger picture, but I wanted to kind of frame this in a different way. Anytime that you're going to get this magnifying glass, people realize that there's a supernova, a positive this, and there's also a negative this. So what you're talking about is the magnification. And so everything is magnified. Everything. So Coach Prime must understand that. And I would suggest to him to you that he's quite savvy. So he doesn't do these things by accident. So we may not understand it in terms of the fandom out there. And so you're going to have folks that are going to speak their opinion in regards to why they saw it being cited. And some of that, let's be frank, some of that may be just down, honest, a framing of where you can see that he could have said it differently and said it better. And I certainly wouldn't begrudge anybody to having that framework. But some of this also is going to be buried in the fandom, in the fact that that is not your team. So you're going to have some axe to grind against the opposite team, no matter how much you try to take it away and say that's not who you are. That's going to be in there because that's why sports are sports, right? That there is a natural fandom mix in there. I will say this, though. It is important to understand the cultural context in terms of what is said. And what I've seen out there in the social media platforms is that I think you can take umbrage of certain things that Coach Prime or any person can say, but I've seen people take a framing of what he says or a snippet and then roll it into something way else, which I was like, that was not what he said. Now, you may have a problem with what he said, but what you're making an argument, not what he said. So that's always intriguing to me. And so as a professor and academic, I'm very entrenched in taking people's words, watching things over several times, and making sure that I digest everything that is said before I provide opinion on it. But I will also say this, that I'm not in the market for sensationalism. So that's not what I do. So it's hard for me to even get into a realistic conversation about that, because some of this is just that. Some of this is the fact that you want to drive out likes and subscriptions to your page. So anytime that you can create controversy in this country, it's valuable, which in some cases is sad, but that is a part of it too. So for me, it's a little bit of all of it in it. And I know some people would say, hey, that's just a way to get off of it. But for me, that's the truth. That's what I do as an academic, is to understand that oftentimes there's truth in all of this, and we got to decide where you're going to stand on it and how much of that is valuable for you to talk about the facts, facts that are involved, or how much of it do you want to make it salacious in terms of being able to push the needle.
I totally agree. I think part of the problem sometimes with the SWAC, I love tradition. Give me my tradition, but sometimes it can be a sacred cow, and he's trying to take not just Jackson State, but the entire SWAC and HBCU to another level. That is his goal, in my opinion. And sometimes I don't think he meant to slight anyone. Like you say, he's very calculated. He know what he says, and he know it's sound. I mean, it's recordings everywhere, video, anything. So, I mean, it didn't bother me. I just wanted to know.
But I would also say this, is sometimes I think people purposely get to Dion and tell him stuff, and he commented. And so while I know he had a reason and a purpose what he's saying, I'm intrigued about how much would he have actually known in terms of coming out there, debriefing after being in such a game and intense, and then that kind of comments are coming out. How much information did he actually know for him to give you the full breadth? And again, we always get segments. It would be fascinating to sit down to have a 60-minute dialogue with Dion on various thought processes he had. And I think people would come away with an entirely different perspective than these little sound bites that we get. Exactly. And so that's for me, that I don't allow sound bites to direct me or dissect me in such a way that it allows me to get off my curve. I'm focused in terms of what's going on. Right. And so unless I have a chance to really talk to you about a subject matter, and I've had some brief encounters where I've had to talk to him, it was off the record for 20, 30 minutes, and it gave me a different disposition in terms of his mindset in general, which is really unique in so many different ways. But oftentimes we take sound bites, and that's not just SWAC. We see it across the media platform in all different spheres, and it's the new media framework of how we move forward. And it's just what we're going to have to understand and get over. It drives business sales. And again, we're talking about a capitalistic society, and that's how we operate, for the good, bad, and ugly.
Well, all I know is we need to just get out of our feelings and our emotions, and let's keep moving forward, people. That's all I gotta say. So, Doc, what are your rankings going into week 4 of SWAC play, and who needs improvement? What teams need improvements?
Boy, you talk about
and you don't have to like make it long, because I know I don't want to take too much.
Yeah, I won't get into it. I'll just talk about some of the highlights this past weekend. Obviously, with Texas Southern having their first loss to Prairie View with the first conference game, you saw that they needed some improvement, but they had a big win against Southern, obviously. And so you have some question marks from Southern. Yeah, when you talk about shutting the team out, many people thought Dooley's high-powered offense would never be shut out. So there's some question there. FAMU, when you have Willie Simmons, who in a lot of people's mind is an offensive genius in his way, to have, just 3 points on the board in terms of what he was able to get done. Florida Classic, obviously you had some extenuating circumstances that may have played into it in terms of what we've heard that week leading up to that game, a couple of weeks leading up to that game. So I think you need some improvement there. It's a lot of teams we just haven't seen play on equal level. So it'd be hard to say that. In terms of improvement, obviously Howard University, you'd have to talk about some improvement that is needed to be done at that place. Tennessee State is interesting. They play 2 top 10 FCS programs. FBS program, for me, it's hard to judge them as yet. But you have the opposite when you have Pine Bluff that started out pretty well that I'd have ranked top 10, but they've played 2 lower division programs outside of the FCS level, and then just played the top 10 team in Oklahoma State. So what can you measure about them? But teams that are doing on the opposite side that are doing really well, I mean, obviously North Carolina A&T, that's another one I think that you have to question in terms of what they're getting done in some ways at the FCS level. And for this conversation, I'll just keep it at the major division. Some programs that are doing really well that people should be excited about and keep your eyes on. South Carolina State, in terms of what they were able to get done against Bethune Cookman. They only played 2 games, the other ones against the FCS program, Central Florida. So I kind of throw that out. Jackson State obviously is clicking on all cylinders, putting up, 50+ points in 2 of their matchups, leaving a lot of points on the board. Credit to Tennessee State defense. But what they're able to do right now defensively is just short of amazing. Another team that people may not, if they're not just looking at the Swac, but if you're talking about FCS, HBCUs, you got to be excited about what's going on in the MEAC with North Carolina Central. I think with the rankings that came out yesterday, they just merged into the top 25, at least according to stats, I believe it is. Yeah. And they've gotten up 3-0. They defeated a top 25 New Hampshire program that came in that game undefeated, and that was a win on the road. So that was solid. So those are some programs that I think you were talking about that are extremely strong right now in terms of what they have going on. Have to throw in Hampton. Obviously, they played a kind of schedule against HBCU early, but they've taken care of business, beating Howard in terms of their matchup, getting a win over their rival, Norfolk State. Some programs that I think we want to see, and maybe we'll learn a little more even this weekend. Alcorn State Braves with a big win over McNeese State. They took it to the wire against Stephen F. Austin. You have Prairie View that played Abilene Christian, solid top 30 type team on the road, and was leading that game for three and a half quarters till late, getting it done. And then they held who they play? Incarnate Word, this past weekend. They held them to 30 points. This is a team that was averaging over 60 points coming into the game in terms of what they look like as a top 5 program. So it's going to be interesting to see who Prairie View is. And now you might get a little different gauge of the win they had over Texas Southern, now that Texas Southern is beating Southern. So you get an intriguing matchup with Alabama State that won their opening in the MEAC, beat Miles, solid quarterback play. Maybe questionable in terms of injuries for both teams in terms of quarterback. Who's going to play in that matchup? But Prairie View goes on the road. So that's the early contrast between the West and the East. East dominated the West last year, so it'll be fascinating to see, will that continue, or is this a different Prairie View team under Coach McDowell, Bubba McDowell over there at Prairie View? So those are some of the question marks that I'm looking at in terms of some teams that'll be fascinating to see. When you talk about that, that would include Norfolk State. Where are they in the mix in terms of them being able to be one of those teams? So those are some of the hot teams that I say at the FCS level, major division level, where I would kind of give my highs, lows, and those in the middle that we need to see a little more of.
That's good. So as far as SWAC play, who are the last 2 standing, and who goes to Atlanta in December?
Do I get to change what I said earlier at Media Day, or do I got to stick with it? I'll say what exactly. Yeah, that's up to me. So I picked Jackson State to come out of the East. I had it as a 3-way tie, though. I had FAMU and Alabama A&M all having 1 loss to each other, but I have Jackson State having a higher ranking, so they would get the bid for the SWAC championship game because of the 3-way tie, the way it breaks down in terms of the tie break. Okay. Now that I've seen a little more, I'm not sure about a 3-way tie, but I still see Jackson State coming out of there. Out of the West, I had Southern, and obviously it's early, but some reservations there. I'm now looking at it maybe coming down to Prairie View and Alcorn State. What's interesting to me for Prairie View, obviously they've been there before. They have 9 and 8 guys coming back. I took some concern because they had a new coach at the head. Coach Bubba McDowell had never coached at the head or was a coordinator, but he seems to have that team that's solidly behind him without question. He has some coordinators and both on defense and offensive that have been in the game in a while. They seem to be very strong in terms of what they've been able to do. When you can take one schematic and just decide that you're going to run against a team, then you open it up your second game for a pass. You take a team with your backup running back and a backup quarterback and hold them defensively 30 points under their average. And these teams that they beat, Southern Illinois beat Northwestern to give you some of the competition against Carnot Word that Carnot Word defeated. So that makes me think that it may come down to Prairie View and Alcorn. I think Southern will still be in the mix. But one thing that I did say earlier with this unique schedule where everybody doesn't play everybody, that you really need to look at home and away games. Prairie View has both Alcorn in Prairie View and Southern in Prairie View. Will that be one of the things that benefits Prairie View to find a way to get back? As they talked about hashtag run it back, looks like those players are serious about getting that done. So if I had to change it, I might put the nod to Prairie View versus Southern, but I'll stick with what I had. I had Jackson State and Southern playing the championship game. I had it back in Jackson. I had Jackson going to the Celebration Bowl, the face-off with South Carolina State. I told everybody to work off North Carolina Central. I'm a little more, especially after the media day that you asked earlier, I had a little inkling. I said I might have picked this too early. There was just something about North Carolina Central that said, I like this team, and they're starting to show me why. Again, I love looking at the schedule. The tough thing for Central, and if they find a way to get it done, they're going to deserve it. Guess where Central has to go to play that game against South Carolina State? I kind of told it when I said go. They have to go on the road, and Orangeburg is a tough place to play. They have a great matchup this weekend, so we can see again, is South Carolina State going to make a statement as they play A&T coming up this weekend, a team that has had their numbers of late, so they're looking to get to Aggies, especially as you talk about a wounded dog right now. They seem to make sure that this dog fight is going to go to the dog in South Carolina State, if you would. So that's one to keep on your mind. But those are the two teams I'd probably look at in the MEAC. And as I said earlier, I had Jackson State facing in a rematch against South Carolina State. And I believe Jackson State going to find a way to get it done this year.
Yeah, we better. I believe so too. It's exciting. It's exciting. So, Coach, one more question. I have we better. I have a segment called it goes down in the DM where the listeners ask the guest questions. I have one question for you, and it's anonymous.
Sure.
With this expansive knowledge of HBCU business you have, would you consider being an AD?
Oh, wow. That's a tough one. I don't know if I want that on record.
You really have.
Since he answered the question, I'm on the show, I will answer it. If the right opportunity came, I would seriously look at it. I think it's a challenge to get in the space of being an athletic director. Most presidents and boards really look at the association of how close you've been in athletics. And while I give Dr. Kevin Granger a lot of credit, he's brought me in the fold at Texas Southern University. I've had a chance to study under him, and previous to that, credit to Commissioner Dr. Charles McCullen. You know, he allowed me in that space, and that's where I've learned a lot of things. But with Kevin Granger, Dr. Kevin Granger now, I've had a chance to put that in action, working with some of those individuals. So yeah, if the right opportunity came along and I had the honor to really do some unique things for HBCUs, I think I would take it seriously, and I would seriously give it great thought about that.
That would be great, Doc. We need you.
Thank you.
That's all I'm saying.
Thank you.
I play games.
I'm humbled by that.
I'm telling you, you know your stuff, and you know Swac sports, and it will be awesome. You'll be an awesome addition as one of the ADs in our conference. So, Doc, I play a game called You Can Get With This or You Can Get With That. And what that is, it's a way for the listeners and myself to get to know the guests better. It's easy, I promise. I'll ask you a few questions, and you choose the best one that fits you. No answer is wrong.
Okay.
So remember that when some of these questions come, because you're going to be like, I don't want to answer it, but you have to. Okay. Do you prefer a store where every item is free or a restaurant where every dish is calorie-free?
Calorie-free.
Yes. Period. I could eat pizza all day. Would you prefer?
That's one of my problems.
That's my favorite. I love pizza. Would you rather see the future or change the past?
Change the future. See the future. So I can change it.
Oh, okay. I like that. Predictability or excitement?
I'd like to say that I think excitement, but I'm predictable. Predictability.
Not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. Do you prefer splitting the bill or taking turns paying?
I used to split the bill, but over the years, I like take turns paying.
Yeah. I guess as you get older, you know, and it depends, because I'm not a drinker. So if I'm out with somebody that's, you know, like friends that's drinking a lot, I'm gonna let y'all have that. I'll probably pay for the food, but not the drinks. Because those are expensive. When you're
no doubt.
You said what?
I said no doubt.
Yeah. When you're exercising, do you prefer listening to music or podcasts?
That's a good one. Used to be music, now it's podcast.
Well, my first
a lot of educational type podcasts, sport businesses you talked about. And then I get into just other leadership business, always trying to find a way to get at the edge, as we talked about earlier. How do you change the past if you don't know? How do you change the future if you don't know your past? So I'm always trying to understand the past, what took place, and look at it not just from a historic perspective, but what were the economics that took place in it? And so that's what I use to try to move forward. So that's how I look at that. That's a great question.
That's good, thank you. So this is a Texas thing. I lived in Dallas for 9 years, so this is a Texas question. Me Casino or Uncle Julio's?
Ooh, Uncle Julio.
What's your favorite meal there?
Oh, it's hard. I like it all.
Mine is the Juanita platter. I love the Juanita platter. I love the Juanita platter. That's my favorite.
I've tried it all.
Yes.
As you can see, that's why I gotta keep exercising.
Now, and
why I need to know calories.
Right. When I first moved to Dallas, I was a Uncle Julio. I was so every day. And the guy that I was dating at the time, and he was like, "You can't go past a size 16. You gotta stop going to Uncle Julio's every day." I couldn't help it. It was so good. But now,
bless your heart.
I've fallen in love with me Casino. I'll eat that. Like that, I have to have that every time I go to Dallas now.
If I had to say it, probably fajitas. It's something about beef fajitas.
Yeah. Oh, they're so good, yummy.
That's my weakness.
I know.
Besides the pizza.
Oh right.
Besides the pizza, beef fajitas give me trouble every time.
Do you prefer a wealthy friend or a loyal friend?
A wealthy friend over what?
Or a loyal friend.
Oh, loyal friend.
Absolutely.
Because if we're loyal, we can make the wealth together.
That's true. Let's see. Texas Southern or Prairie View?
Now that one I won't answer. That's a good one. I'll give you a little backstory to that. They always ask me that because I came to the game real early. When I took the opportunity to take this job at Texas Southern University, you know, we went to the games. And, you know, I'm a gamer, so I'm coming to all the things. So I would wear black. I would wear black on purpose with allegiance to either institution. And people would rib me and always ask me, who you going for? I should take a line from Stephen Harlan Robinson where he talked about he going with a paycheck. But the line that I would always tell everybody is like, I never lose. I love this. I never lose because I'm going for whoever wins. I'm a winner.
That's cute. I do Charles like that too. I'm like, you know, with this Texas Southern thing, what's up? Where's your allegiance? Do you love? He was like, girl, what?
Oh, I get challenged. I was walking out of the parking lot doing a professional job. I didn't have the colors on coming out to the Labor Day Classic. And the president of Texas Southern University's National Alumni Association, after I'm going over there with a previous friend that was the president, and said, hey, come talk to us. I'm going over there, show support and love, pay dues, both of them. I'm a national alumni member. I pay checks, all that stuff, created a scholarship at Texas Southern University. I haven't been paid my regular dues. So I believe in paying it forward and investing in both sides. institutions, because I'm proud of them both, without a doubt. But no, she charged me up. She said, what you doing? And then I had another friend that called me Tiger, the Hidden Panther. So I get it. So I understand it. So
I really think you're still the Hidden Panther because you still ain't gave me an answer. So we gonna.
No, I'm not. I told you. I always win.
Okay.
That's the answer you gonna get from me.
Okay.
I would not pick one over the other. I really support other. Being in media, I will say this: there have been times where I pulled for one of the teams, but it's usually in terms of pulling for one of the coaches that I've had relationship with and been connected with, and I think they need to win more than the other coach. So those are the times where I have pulled for the coach, but it's actually being on both sides, and it depends on who at that time needs to win. So I think it's unfair for me to ask that question because I've been in media for so long that I literally have been able to pull my way away from family. It's all about seeing whoever's the best team or who needs to win at the time, or who is it best for in terms of the calculation of Swac, or who is it in terms of a national standing. That's who I root for in that interest because I have the bigger picture of the Swac or national HBCU standings in terms of it.
And you said something. I agree with you on that, and I'm gonna keep it moving because we're almost done. Now that I'm in media, now I still root for Jackson State. That's a given, but I keep my trash talk to a minimum now. I try to, not be so biased, and I try to just, like if I put a post about Jackson State, I'm like, great win, Tigers, blah, 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 but I'll give some information on the game, who did what, I'll try to do, instead of just being like, y'all suck, but we beat y'all 62, so I used to do that because I like to win, and I'm very competitive when it comes to Swac sports. So I see. Oh my God!
I like that. But I'll give you another example that just happened with Prairie View and Jackson State. Mm-hmm. From a fandom, obviously I wanted Prairie View to win, but I thought in terms of the momentum for the Swac, what it needed, Jackson State needed to win that game. Okay. And so I did not feel bad, if you would, that Prairie View did win that game. I wanted Prairie View to play well. If they won, I would have, loved it, obviously, from that perspective. But in terms of my real rooting interest, I wanted to see that Jackson State got it done. The opposite happened where the MEAC Swac, where I'll tell you I elevated from an HBCU perspective. I think everything that was going on with the MEAC, I thought South Carolina State and the MEAC needed that win more than the Swac. Even though MEAC had dominated for so long, everybody was crushing and wanting to bury the MEAC and put sand on the dead. And I don't know if a loss would have hurt more than I believe the win in terms of powering the MEAC. And I think this year will be different. The Swac needs to get over that hump in terms of that. So I would look more for whoever came out of the Swac to get it done. But those are two examples where it was more about the business that I've learned over the years has more of my interest in terms of watching a certain outcome.
I agree. I like that, Coach. Doc, why I keep calling you Coach? I like that, Doc.
No problem. Like I said, I can't get fired.
Right.
I'm good.
So we're getting into fall weather. Actually, I think tomorrow. We're getting into fall. Mm-hmm. What are your favorites to eat? Chili or red beans and rice?
Oh, chili. Texas boy, chili. I have Louisiana roots, but they probably gonna kick me out after I answer that question. I love some red beans and rice, but if I have a choice between chili, and I'm gonna give a shout out. Make sure I give my brownie point. I love my wife's chili. In terms of what she does with chili, I'll get cool. I can't wait till the first nip, and I'll be like, let's do chili. So I like that. But I will add this when I just asked that other thing when I told you I can't get fired. One of the things, if I ever had a chance for the athletic directorship, one of the things I would want to negotiate in with that would be tenure. I love the fact that I would want to have a teaching role at whatever institution I have, even if that's helping them develop a sport management program, so that we'd have the mix between athletics and the business of sport, which I think would elevate the athletic department. So I would want tenure going into whatever job if I had a chance to look at the athletic.
Oh, that would be dope. Yeah. I like that, Doc. But I need to get Mrs. Cavill's recipe because I make a mean chili. I actually was in a chili cook-off at work a few weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
And mine made it to the judges' table. I didn't win, but I came
The
close.
judge's table, I'll take you up on that. I want to try that.
I came close, but I want her. Yeah, I love. That's one of my
I'll
favorite.
let her know.
favorites.
I will let her know. Yeah.
So
Gosh.
last but not least, this is so cute to me. So, I talked to you before we got on the air. I love your hair. I think it's so dope. So who wears it best, Dr. Cornel West or Don King?
I'm an academic, so I'm gonna say Cornel West.
I know.
Actually, in a lot of ways, to support this, part of this is Frederick Douglass. So I go back in terms of the connection to history. So as long as I wear this, I don't know how long, but like I said, a lot of people have gotten to it, and some people even call it a part of the brand. But one of the reasons that I decided to kind of keep it, and people will say Cornel West, and obviously Don King, and I take all that in terms of appreciation. But I'll share with you on this show the connection that I really have, paying homage, if you would, is to Frederick Douglass.
I love that. That's what's up. I never knew that. And also, the hair goes with the lab, the mad scientist.
That's right.
I love it. That's dope.
That's right.
So, Doc, it has been a pleasure having you on the show. Tell the listeners how they can follow you on social media. Thank you. Tell the listeners.
Sure. On social media,
go ahead.
On social media, you can follow me at Dr. Kenyatta Cavil, DrKenyatta and that's DrKenyatta. We do the shows every Tuesday and Thursday from 6 to 7 Central Standard Time. Catch us live on Facebook. If you can't catch it, you can get it on demand on YouTube at Inside the HBCU Sports Lab. We do a Sunday version now during football season to give you updates and talk about what took place on Saturday. So you can join us early before you go to church if you're a church goer, 9 a.m. Central Standard Time. We keep it to an hour to keep your attention, keep it power packed. It's a lot of stuff we try to stuff in there. We'll do that. And we do our special assignments when big games. We find a way to go live and give you the updates. And that's pretty much what we're doing. That's Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. You can follow me and I try to keep you updated on the business side of sports, particularly with HBCU sports culture, what I call the sporting HBCU dash.
Awesome. And guys, you can follow me at She Say Sports on Facebook, She Say Sports 23 on Instagram, at She Say 23 on Twitter, and please subscribe to our YouTube page, She Say Sports. Well, that's my show for today.
Follow her. She's doing great work.
Thank you, Doc. Stop it. We're gonna talk after this. That's my show for today. Until next time, this is Sonia with She Say Sports.